Thanks for joining today's Monadnock Broadband Group meeting. I'm Henry Underwood, working at Southwest Region Planning Commission, and the Monadnock Broadband Group. You can see we're an informal coalition of municipal officials, practitioners, and other stakeholders with an interest in understanding and coordinating relative to broadband issues. Sometimes we're asked, well, what's the membership of the Monadnock Broadband Group? If you meet that definition, I think you are considered a member. So that's it in short. There's no official roster. And as a side note, the Planning Commission has provided staff support and technical assistance relative to broadband issues, including facilitating meetings of the Monadnock Broadband Group. So today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. We are here in person in Keene at Hampshire County Delegation Hall. Just joined right now by John Doherty, who will be speaking later in the agenda. And we have several folks online. Just to note that as is typical, we record our meetings so folks can tune in later at a more convenient time. You can always find those meetings at the Planning Commission's website, swrpc.org/broadband. All right. Everyone is kind of familiar with Zoom best practices. Please stay muted when you're not speaking. I encourage folks to introduce yourself via the chat. Share your contact information. I'll also point out about the chat, you should see some links that I pre-populated in the chat so that you can visit our website, so you can visit content related to today's agenda. So hopefully you are seeing those and can check them out as we get to those milestones. Just a quick recap of the last Monadnock Broadband Group meeting. It was a pretty packed agenda. We introduced a project from the Monadnock region that addressed digital literacy and access issues, particularly for older adults, through engagement of individuals as well as organizations serving that population group. And published a report that was shared at the last meeting. We were joined by Clay Burtis, who represents the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, to talk about what's happening at the federal level relative to their various funding programs, including the BEAD program, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. I know folks that have joined us so far are familiar with that. Other topics, yeah, there was more. We heard from folks at UNH about the broadband mapping initiatives going on. Their work to challenge the FCC fabric, collect speed test data, solicit information from towns about addresses, getting permission for our state and other state departments to share that with them. And last but certainly not least, Matt and Serva talked about the states, the status of the states, various programs, not just the NTIA funding. At that point, it was probably more capital projects and other funding sources. Thanks, folks, for introducing yourselves. And today's agenda. We basically have two topics today. The impetus for the meeting was to jumpstart some of the discussion around the broadband plans that are being developed by the state and by their contractors, the requirements for some of the broadband funding that are flowing to the state. So we're going to talk about two topics. One that's related to the NTIA funding, and we're joined by John Doherty from Mission Broadband to address that. as well as Matt Conserva for BEA. And we'll also hear about the state's first ever digital equity plan, which maybe a couple of you were even able to join their session earlier in the week. So, and I think people are familiar with this, but the two differences are the BEAD funding is focused on infrastructure, getting the physical connections to homes and businesses and other places. Digital equity is about reducing barriers to accessing that infrastructure, including things like the devices and online resources, building scales. So, and today's agenda time, I'm not pretty sure we're not going to use it, but wanted to budget a little more time for the BEAD work, and then we'll hear from UNHCE Cooperative Extension in Charlotte. Thank you about the digital equity plan update. Great. So just a brief introduction before I hand things off for agenda 2. Folks joining today as presenters include, Matt Conserva from BEA, John Doherty from Mission Broadband, and Charlie French from University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. They'll lead these next 2 topics. Before I turn it over to John, I would like to ask Matt, who's Director of Broadband Initiatives at BEA, if you'd like to first kick things off or set the stage for this work before they speak to their individual projects.
Absolutely. No, thank you for putting this together, Henry. You guys are obviously, we've said it before, really have led the state with your broadband efforts going back before 2020, obviously. So right now we're really heavily into IIJA, the infrastructure with the BEAD and digital equity. Obviously, John Doherty and Charlie, both their teams are playing a huge role in putting our plans together. As far as a recap on capital projects, BMGI rolled out, I think, at the beginning of September. Application windows closed 45 days later, the middle of October. We are still going through applications. We do have a curing period that we're going through all the applications, and we're going to be sending them back, some of them back to ISPs and or towns to fix any defects in those applications. So more to come on BMGI capital projects, but I'll let Charlie and John Doherty highlight all the work they're doing on their teams. So, and I apologize, I do have a hard stop at 2 o'clock, but again, you're in great hands with Charlie and JD.
Thanks, Matt, for setting the stage. And with that, we'll turn things over next to John Doherty. John Doherty will talk about the state's some of the state's BEAD plans. And again, this is nearly $200 million to expand broadband infrastructure, and the state has just released plans for public comment. And I've asked John to talk a little bit about what those are and hear what questions folks have, and he'll provide instructions on how to submit on this. So, yeah, John, I'll turn it over to you. You can advance your slides up here from the podium when you're ready. Okay. Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you, Henry. So yeah, I'll go through some quick slides, but enjoy the conversation. For those, reiterate, broadband equity, access, and deployment. Everybody just calls it BEAD nowadays. So if we skip over using BEAD, that's really what it is. And that is the NTIA, so FCC, IIJA, as we said, the work being done from them, and the key word, there's a few key words in that, right, is equity, access, and deployment. So we're gonna talk about the deployment and the equity of, okay, making sure that 100% of New Hampshire granite staters have access to broadband, and broadband defined in this case as high speed, adequate, reliable broadband and affordable. So that's really what we're after today. Is it the arrow key?
Yeah.
That, all right. So, and New Hampshire was allocated $196 million. And so that is the money that's going to be used for deployment. Charlie will talk a little bit later about the digital equity access and the money that's going to be done towards that. But for the most part, what I'm going to speak about today is how we're going to get, I'll call it internet where it ain't, and internet where it's not adequate. And so where we're at is we're developing a 5-year action plan, and that's being reviewed, at the BEA and commissioners level at this time. And then two things that have real deadlines on it is the initial proposal, and it's called Volume 1 and Volume 2. And I really want to talk about those today. So the initial proposal is how the actual work that's going to go on from BEA to, Matt just mentioned BMGI, how we're going to run a grant program to get providers and towns that want to do it on and operate on their own. Anybody that wants to apply for the grant to say, okay, here's how we're going to solve it in this area. So Volume 1 is literally going to talk about the areas, or I should say the define broadband, and then define what they call a state-run challenge process. And so you're going to see maps in Volume 1 and Volume 2 that define, where the FCC describes where there is currently adequate or available broadband, and that's defined as 100/20 or above, where there's underserved, and so that's 25/3 up to 100/20, and then unserved, which is below 25/3. And so the monies that we're looking at is we're going to talk about. You're going to see in the program unserved and underserved. Unserved, I'm going to use rough numbers, about 26,000. Underserved, 10,000, 11,000. So overall 36,000 or so locations on the map that we're going to try to that this money is going to be to solve and get everybody adequate broadband. So with that said, these proposals are based on NTIA guidance and how they tell us to, I'll say, fill out their documentation and answer their questions as to how we're going to solve the problem. So when you review these, you'll see a series of questions and then answers to those questions. It's not a easy read document, I'll say, by any stretch, but you really just kind of going to go through it and say, okay, here's the question they asked, here's the answer to it. So let's talk about Volume 1 in the state-run challenge process. So that's going to be based on, areas, locations that say they have it, who says they do have it, doesn't have it, not individually, but nonprofits, towns, can produce a group, I'll call it challenge process to that end. There's UNH has put maps out, right, and Matt has done a great job, and UNH working through what they show as served and unserved, because they've been collecting data for a few years now. And then there's the FCC maps, which is what all the money is allocated to, and that's our guidelines. We have to run by the FCC. And at the end of the day, if we have a location that's challenged, that's going to be put through a challenge process. It's going to be reviewed. The providers have a chance to, kind of push back on that if they or show that they say, okay, no, it really is served or it isn't served. And then we can actually change where the I'll call it the project areas will be defined. So they're going to be defined right now as towns, but it will show locations on the map. They're called broadband serviceable locations, BSL. And that's, you'll see run through all of those documents. And that really is what we have to run by. We have, it's the FCC guidelines. They're the ones that are applying the money. It's $196 million, for these locations that we described. If we discover there are more locations, that does not mean that the state of New Hampshire gets more money. because it's already allocated across all 50 states. But it does define the fact that the project area says, okay, we are going to require, BEAs require 100% coverage of these project areas. So that will take care of all areas, all unserved, all unserved in the towns. And the way the money is allocated, it has to be done, is you have to prove through these programs, these proposals, that first, you're going to solve all of the unserved areas. Second, you're going to solve all the underserved areas. And if there's funding left, then you're going to solve the fact that all community anchor institutions will have gig service. And then after those three deployment methods are met, then there is option, if there's money left over and available, there are options, what they call non-deployment funds, like digital equity. And so when you read through it, again, this is just some general guidelines that NTIA has given that I'm sharing with you today. And what we're really going to push, I'll say a couple of times while I'm up here, is we need public comment. And so I was talking to Henry Underwood earlier. I can't remember, Henry, if you said it's already out, you're going to send this out to all constituents, on this broadband group as well as.
Yeah, it's in their issue boxes.
Yeah, as well as regionally. So what's in there is a website. BEA has this posted, both of these plans on the website, proposals they should call them, on the website, and an email address for comment. And what we're looking for is some valued comment as to, okay, by example, you would say, yes, we're, in this so-and-so town, we feel we don't have adequate, we don't have any broadband service or limited broadband service. So we're supporting BEA in this effort to get 100% coverage throughout. You could read the proposal and say, hey, I don't understand scoring matrix, right? I don't understand the project area. That's a comment you can make, and that can be clarified. So that's really one of the pushes why I'm here today, is to say, okay, I'll tell you right now, if you haven't seen it, volume 1 is 20 some odd pages, volume 2 is 100. And so it's not a quick, easy read, but there is really good information in both of those. And volume 2 tells, it really starts to explain, okay, here's what we're going to do for project areas, here's what we're going to do for scoring. Here's how we want, I'll call it the eligible entity as you read through this. Sorry, it's the state, and then the sub-grantees. The sub-grantees are going to be, the towns that are trying to build, own, and operate. They're going to be, I say towns, anybody, counties, whatever it may be. It's going to be the service providers, anybody that's going to apply for an application. And so you're going to see, okay, here's how I apply, or here's, I'm sorry, not necessarily, I should say it that way. Here's the rules around what's going to happen. Here's how we're going to score it. And you may have questions around that. So again, send your questions in, send your comments in about the volume 1 and volume 2. The actual, I'll call it RFP, RFQ, it hasn't been defined yet, RFI, will go out next year, and I'll jump a little ahead into what they call a final proposal. But the way the time works, let's go back to timing. So BEA has been working on this for a while. Mission Broadband has been working with them. Charlie French, the UNHCE has been working with them on digital equity. These volume 1 and volume 2 requirement is posted for 30 days. So that went out on December 13th. I'm sorry, November 13th. It will close on December 13th. And that's the time that we have to get public comment back, as well as some other stuff going on behind the scenes with actual NTIA is looking at it, providing their comments, because before the end of December, and we've spoken with Matt and his team at BEA, we want to do it before Christmas, that we're going to upload these plans to the NTIA website for their official review. And that's important because there are timestamps that are going to come off the approval of volume 1 and volume 2. When volume 1 is approved and volume 2 is submitted, you can actually start the challenge process. When volume 2 is approved, it starts a 1-year clock, the 12-month clock that the final you have to create and upload the final proposal. So let's just talk reasonableness. I'll say right now, the final proposal, I'm sorry, the volume 1 and volume 2, 30 days, it's gonna bring us to December 13th. Those will get uploaded somewhere, I'll call it around December 20th, somewhere in that range, hopefully before Christmas, Matt. And so then that goes to NTIA. So remember, there's 50 states. Some have already done it. There's a lot of people going to upload stuff on the, mid to late December. And so then they're going to send that out to the review team. The review team is going to take a couple of months. NTIA is saying probably don't expect anything until November, and maybe as late as March before we get approval of these plans. And so once again, volume 2 is approved, then we have a year to get the final proposal. So let's define what that means. The final proposal is we've gone through the challenge process, and they should back up real quick. There's also another process that's going to happen before the challenge process. It's called deduplication, which means these maps that UNH is doing, through the challenge process, there's going to be, hey, we show that this one is, 2 different people show that this is served, so that has to come off, or areas show that this is unserved. So we got to go through a process to clean the maps up. So we have a very clear expectation when we put out the RFP that says, okay, here are the actual project areas, and here are the actual locations that are unserved and underserved. So that's a process that has to happen at the same time. NTIA has to approve everything. So then you got some time for them to approve it. And then once all of that is ready, then BEA will put out this request that says, okay, who's going to solve these, I'll call them red dots on the map, these project areas in every red dot in every project area. And so, service providers and towns, whoever it may be, will then submit their grant applications and say, okay, here's how we're going to solve it. Here's the design we're going to use. Here's the technology we're going to use. Here's what we got for workforce. Here's everything that NTIA is required that we request of. Here's also the cost, which would be key. Here's the time frame when we can do it. And just a sidebar on that, once there's a contract signed, the NTIA guidelines are you have 4 years to solve it, to get it installed, I should say. So you can see how the time frame is going to go. Because if you start in March of 24 and there's a year, to solve it, to get a final proposal and approved, you're into 2025 before the money hits the street. That's the reality of what's happening. And then there's 4 years to get it done. So with that said, the final proposal is that request goes out. BEA will get all the responses back. They will choose the winners, I'll call it, who's the approved vendor, and start talking about how contracts will work. And once those are all set for all of these, I'll call it right now 36,000 unserved and underserved areas, that's what was in the final proposal. And that's what NTIA approves and then releases the 196 million. So that the money is earmarked federally, so it's not going anywhere. And that's the push right now, is to get these in and say, okay, federal government has approved and earmarked this. They can't claw the money back. That's a key piece of the political process. And so after we put in the final proposal, they approve that, the money hits the streets, and then we can start doling money out. Everybody, starts building, and then there's a lot happening in the streets at that point in time. So that is a quick run through of those plans and proposals, I should say it, but really take a look at volume 1, volume 2, support BEA's efforts, I would say, and say, yes, we need broadband, and here's why we need broadband. Adequate, available, adequate, and affordable, robust high-speed broadband. That's really, that's the intent behind this. And I think the federal government has done a good job putting out what their expectations are of this money. And so at this point in time, it's up to the states to say, okay, we've got it, we're going to solve it. Let's talk about New Hampshire real quick. Sorry, I've been talking, I'll open it for questions, but right now the maps are showing us that New Hampshire is 93% served, and we'll see that in these proposals. So that's a good news story. So now what we're trying to do is fill in the gaps, right? Because where are there big gaps or there are small gaps? Because at the end of the day, you got to solve that red dot everywhere. That's the solution. So you can generally say that there's going to be a lot of it, a high percentage of it. Certainly, can be done with what's in the street today, can be expanded, or new I'll call it private premise, but doesn't have to be necessarily. Has to provide adequate high-speed broadband. a lot of that is gonna get solved. There will be areas, right, and this is where the conversations will start to happen, where it's called high cost areas from the federal government side, from the NTIA. So high cost areas, right, we've got miles and miles of, I'll call it farmland, little roads, there are a few towns, there are a few houses at the end, how do I get to them? Right, and so that may not be the expectation that, you know what, it's not cost effective, nor do we have enough money to do fiber to the premise to those, so what other technologies are available? And those will be conversations that happen as we go through this request process and say, okay, got it, I see these, you know, and maybe they're honey camps, nobody wants fiber, nobody wants fiber in a honey camp. But there has to be a good reason that you didn't solve a problem on the map, right? That's really what it comes down to. So I'll give it at least one more time, public comment, looking for comments. And certainly, you know, you can read those over. If we need to come back, Henry, I'll say, I'll offer right now, there's another meeting.
Thank you.
Towards the end, I'm more than happy to join.
Okay.
You know, and answer, because after people have a little bit of time, but Henry and I talked a few weeks ago, and, you know, we thought, well, maybe after Thanksgiving, people have time to look at it, but we decided, you know what, let's get ahead of it. Let's have this conversation today. Understand what we're trying to look for, have you guys start reading it, get the emails out that, you know, you can find the documents online, and then read through it, and then if we need to have another group meeting, let's talk about that. So
Thanks for that offer, John.
sure. So with that said, any questions?
And I'll ask the first one, I guess, John. So, and I think I know part of the answer, but submitting comments, it's fine to mention some comments here today, but they should be sent in writing, you know, to the email address.
Absolutely. We need those in writing. Yeah,
They need to be in writing. And as an aside to folks joining today, to folks listening to this later, the Planning Commission would really appreciate being copied. You could copy me. So we have some sense of what comments are being sent as we may be considering our own.
And if I can comment on that.
Yeah.
The reason that we're kind of looking at it, not a group, I'll call it comment from the planning commission, but from the individual towns and individuals themselves. That say, okay, here's what we want for our town or our area or our law, right, whatever they be. So it's not, just trying to clarify, we want as many comments as we can get, so that happens individually or by town, and not just through the planning commission.
Yes, that would be our preference too. We do not consider ourselves a clearinghouse. You should absolutely submit your own comments directly, but we want to be cognizant of those. I'll ask one more question before we give a chance for Al or Dale or others to bring something up. There are in volume 1, it talks about, you know, the number and location of the unserved and underserved location, the red dots on the map.
Yes.
And I think they're on page 8 or 9 for folks who may be wanting to see that. But is there another place where people can see those at a little more resolution, like at a town level?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So one of the obstacles that we have is we have access to all of the physical addresses and what they call broadband service location addresses and the latitude and longitude through a license that we have with the FCC. We are not allowed to share these addresses because of privacy laws. So that's why that resolution isn't great. Gives you a general idea, but the FCC broadband app, which is online, and just go to NTIA FCC broadband app, that will pull it up and you can actually see a better, you know, you can put your own address. It's not a map. So let's talk about that real quick. The individual not be able to do the state challenge process, but an individual can still do the FCC broadband map challenge.
Okay.
So if you put your address in and say, hey, it doesn't exist, there's a resolution, there's a way to do that online with the FCC map. But and here's the irony, we are not allowed because we signed a license agreement. If you go to the FCC map, you'll see addresses.
Okay.
Okay.
And that I think you answered a follow-up question I had, and that is there is still some time for addresses to be challenged or added?
It's ongoing, it'll always be ongoing, you know, these are the best maps we have had in a long time, because it's all census block before this, now it's address location. But let's talk about time with maps. So, the FCC is using a company called CostQuest to get the addresses, right? So that's what they're not using 911 data, they use a different data set. So that does not capture all the addresses. And then the available broadband service at those locations is uploaded twice a year from the service providers. So you're always 6 months behind. The latest one is going to be coming out shortly. We're hoping before the end of the year. They had till, again, it was August, and they pushed it to September, and they pushed it to October. But there was a time frame they had to have it in because of everything going on. The FCC pushed it a month, and now they have the new data, and they're sorting through it, and they're going to upload it. So that's when the serviceable location, what's available, and the address match for a short period of time, and then it keeps getting updated.
Okay, thank you. How about folks online? Any questions or comments for John? Okay, I'm gonna hit you with a couple more, John, because I think these may come up as people watch this at another time. One thing that I was personally pleased to see was the focus on community anchors.
Yes.
Serving community anchors. This was a feature of New Hampshire's broadband planning work more than 10 years ago. And it's actually for that reason, I was wondering could you say anything about what made the list, and who compiled the list of?
Sure. And some of this we worked with the work that University of Hampshire has been doing for a while and identifying those, but it's also in the plan that states, okay, here's who we're capturing as anchor institutions. But let's talk about network design for a second. Okay. Typically, the anchor institutions are not going to be at the end of a line, right? In the end of a road, they're going to be more centrally located. They could be a little bit farther out, town range halls, or whatever it is that's under that definition. But if as BEA looks at these project areas, and as these project areas are built, I'm pretty confident it's going to go by every single anchor institution, right? So by default, good engineering and good design, they're going to be picked up.
I see.
Right, and that's kind of the same with the underserved areas. You're going to go out to do the serve, you're going to pick up some of the underserved as well. So anchor institutions, whether they're defined the way maybe a town wants them or not, because there may be some that weren't defined by, and again, we went by a lot of NTIA guidelines, they're going to get picked up.
Okay.
Right, there's a good chance they're going to get picked up because it's going to be a serviceable location.
Okay. That might be like a specific comment though, that
Yeah.
someone reviewing the document could provide. They look up their town and they say, you missed this particular building. It has 1,000-mile, drive, or excuse me, 1,000-foot, private driveway.
So that would be a great comment.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep going with a couple more, and then we can maybe move on to Charlie or folks online. So later, the state will announce an RFP or RFI or other, solicitation for projects. Does this process allow for like overlapping proposals?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep, and then we expect that. We talked about that. Matt might have jumped off with his he probably went his eyes just opened up.
It looks like it did jump off.
And we expect that, right? Because you're gonna have towns that want to put in, you're gonna have service providers that, cover part of a town at all, and there would be two different ones that, because you're gonna be contiguous towns that say, hey, I'm gonna reach over my town line and I'm gonna do, so yeah, there's gonna be overlapping. What the money cannot be spent on is the existing service locations. Right, so they may want to, there'd be a project area that overlaps in one, let's take two towns side by side, 50% is covered town A by one service provider, 50% isn't covered at all. Town B, 50% is covered by another service provider, but not covered, the other 50% not at all. And service providers look at it going, well, if I build out my additional 50%, I can do the other 50% too. And I want to compete with the other provider.
Mhm.
That competition has to come off their own dime.
Okay. What about in a scenario where you have two proposals for an unserved area?
Yeah.
Like, let's say, you know, an incumbent telecom and a cable company.
Yes,
Could they both go forward? Or
we
could-
expect that.
Okay,
Yeah, we expect that, and then there's, when you go through and you see the scoring, in this volume 2, you can see how that's being looked at,
okay.
and there's the scoring metrics, if you will, to it.
Mhm. Okay, I have one or two more. Someone interrupt me though, if you've got one. Still getting to this.
This is Alfie Eisenberg from Francistown. Just on the subject of addresses and stuff, we just applied this round of BMGI, but when I finally, I think I dropped the ball a little. I didn't realize this thing about the BSLs and how many would be missing, and so I was a little bit late on putting in a challenge for addresses in town in the unserved areas. So what I'm wondering is when you do challenge an address, or we did a bulk challenge, what happens if like a different provider or something comes in and challenges them? Who decides who's right?
Yeah, so you'll put in, right, so through the state challenge process, it'll come clear, you know, the next year when they put it out. A town can say, you know what, we don't feel we're getting adequate broadband here. And then the provider, to your point, has the period of time where they can have a rebuttal to that. And then the state, BEA, will take that and say, okay, here's what was said, here's what we see. They may ask questions on both sides, and the BEA is the final decision.
Did that answer your question, Alfie?
Well, I'm saying, so does the FCC go and check each address after you submit a challenge, or are they just going by what each side reports?
Yeah, the audio's a little bit garbled in here, unfortunately, Alfie. I think one thing you mentioned is you submitted a challenge through the FCC's challenge process. And
Yes.
I think one thing John is saying is that there's also a challenge process built into this BEAD proposal. In volume 1 is where they explain how a municipality, for example, could have the opportunity to provide more input.
It's not at an individual level, it's at a town.
Even if they're not a internet service provider.
Yeah.
So just the government.
Right, and that's what we did. So, but I mean, you're talking BEAD here, so I'm kind of talking about BMGI, unfortunately, but sorry to.
Yeah, I wish Matt were here to clarify.
Oh yeah, I saw he was here, but he's gone now. Oh, that's too bad.
Oh, I didn't guess he did. Yeah, okay.
So that might be a question to follow up with him directly. But
yeah,
there is
I have mentioned it to him before, but yeah, the other difficulty is there's also the New Hampshire database, and then there's another FCC database, right? The broadband mapping one, and they don't. It makes it very difficult. I'm just commenting on what we're going through to actually report on all those different databases on where they're wrong and where they're not, even though we only have several hundred addresses in Francistown. But I just wanted to point out that for us in our served area there were 80 something addresses missing in the BSL list, and in our unserved area there was 21 missing. So when you're talking about 800 total addresses, that was quite a few.
So I think, Alfie, I would recommend looking at the challenge process that deals with addressing that's in these initial proposal documents.
Okay,
something to, I lost my train of thought, but, the other aspect to this and what some of the information the state has sent out is the list of specific locations. And it's, I think gonna be a little challenging for you to vet those numbers, against the lists that are provided with these initial proposal documents as like appendices. But I think the state or UNH or the planning commission could help you determine if, what's considered, a serviceable location or not.
And it's a great, if you form that into a comment and say, specifically, here's, put a comment in that says, here's the area.
Yeah.
Here's what we're challenged with. Is this going to be solved? Right. The question or comment may be.
That's great. So I think John's saying, like, you don't have to have all of the answers. You can explain the situation, and this, the state or their partners will investigate it.
yeah, so actually for the BMGI stuff, that's what I did. I submitted a challenge and I submitted the documentation with the application that we did, so.
Okay.
But anyway, thanks, sorry.
Thank you.
Maybe one last question, and then maybe we can switch gears to Charlie French from Cooperative Extension. And you've listed here in your scope of work, Mission is also going to develop a 5-year action plan for the BEAD work. And any update you can share on when it might be available? Is there going to be a need for comments or review?
So the timing of it isn't allowing for public comment.
Okay.
But it will be available online.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's getting reviewed, questions answered from, I'll call it from Mission Broadband, from the state had questions. So we're looking at that now and reviewing it, and when everybody's comfortable with it, that also has to be uploaded. That upload has to happen before Thanksgiving. We're going to upload this next week. I get that uploaded so Matt can have a good Thanksgiving. Same like Christmas, get it uploaded before Christmas, get the other ones uploaded before Christmas. Only the federal government can come up with a deadline of December 27th. Be that as it is, the other one's November 26th or something, right? So the 5-year plan has to be uploaded. We want to do that next week. Once that's done, it's absolutely going on the website. It just it did not allow public comment time.
Okay, I understand. So we'll publicize that to folks.
Yes.
So you're aware of how to read it through. Great. Well, I think that's again, this announcement is just this week. This is hot off the press. We wanted to get the conversation started because of pretty short window to provide written comments, and I think this was a really successful way to do that. So John, thanks for the intro.
Comment.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So next on the agenda, I'll switch gears to talk about the state's first ever digital equity plan, and this is happening somewhat in tandem with the work Mission Broadband has worked on. It's been led by folks at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, as well as the National Collaborative for Digital Equity. They kicked off, review, I believe, of the plan and comment period earlier this week, and we're fortunate enough today to have Dr. Charlie French, who's the Director of Community Development at the UNH Cooperative Extension, to talk a little bit more about their work and tell us how and when folks can provide feedback. So Charlie, I stopped sharing my screen. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Henry. Thank you very much for the introduction. As Henry said, I'm Charlie French. I lead our community and economic development programming with UNH Cooperative Extension. based in Durham, but I find myself most days I'm out visiting communities across the state. JD, really appreciate your overview of BEAD. I think what folks will find as they listen to me talking about digital equity, that there are a lot of synergies and interconnections between the BEAD plan and the digital equity plan. And I like to think of the digital equity plan as the sister plan. It might be the little sister plan of the BEAD plan, but it's nonetheless integrally related. Before I get started, just wanted to do a check. Can someone just say can you hear me okay? Is the audio coming through okay?
You're coming fine here, Charlie.
Okay, perfect, excellent. And all right, I'm going to share screen and hopefully you folks can see it. View. Still title slide only. Is it coming through okay?
Yeah,
okay.
great.
Thank you. All right, so yeah, so I'll just start out with a quick overview of the digital equity plan. So whereas the BEAD plan is focused primarily on infrastructure, the digital equity plan is not only focused on making sure that residents across the state of New Hampshire have access to broadband, but it's also making sure that they have access to digital devices, computers, laptops, and other devices that enable them to utilize broadband and other digital technologies, but also to help them to access a host of services and resources that are available through digital technologies. And those would include things like telehealth, particularly in rural places that might not have a health clinic or a hospital. Educational resources, if you're taking classes online through an institution or informal learning. In these days, you can't even do online banking if you aren't connected to the internet. It's hard to get a bank account, period. Job placement services. There's a whole host of ways that people use internet and digital resources to be able to tap into those critical resources that they need to make it through the day and to thrive. So again, our focus is really on what we call covered populations. Those are underserved populations in the state of New Hampshire, and helping them to be able to connect to these resources. And I'll talk about what those covered populations are in a second. So the primary goals and priorities of the digital equity plan are, number one, related and tied to BEAD, is focusing on enhancing broadband access and affordability. So this is where affordability becomes a big component of it. We're not really focused on the infrastructure. We're really focused on the end users, the residents, and the underserved communities to make sure that they have access to broadband, whether it's in the home or through a library or through another resource. So that's the one of the main goals. The second goal is to make sure that residents across the state of New Hampshire have access to computers, devices, assistive devices. For instance, if you have a disability, assistive devices can help you navigate technology, and also multilingual support. A third goal is enhancing digital literacy. So you may have access to broadband internet, you may have access to devices, but you also need to have those digital literacy skills to be able to use them effectively. And number four is around cyber safety, and to make sure that people are able to use digital resources safely. We know that there's scamming, there's hacking, there's all sorts of threats that we have to be aware of if we want to be able to use the internet safely. So cybersecurity is a goal. And then lastly is making sure that whether it's a state website as well as organizations or businesses, to make sure that websites, web portals that point to critical resources, public resources primarily, that they're accessible, that usable, and they're inclusive. So that, for instance, if there are people that are multilingual or have a language barrier, that's considered when developing websites and resources. One thing that's unique about the digital equity plan is that these are the primary goals and metrics that we want to accomplish, but they're for the purpose of these areas of impact. We want to make sure that if we can do these 5 things, that we have better civic engagement in our communities, more opportunities to participate in community activities, engage with fellow community members. 2, we want to make sure that there's economic opportunity, that we can leverage these resources to help people attain gainful employment, and really help employers be able to access employment resources across the state as well. Educational opportunities. And we want to make sure that people can access education online, whether it's through a university, school, or an informal system. There's a lot of places it's difficult because there aren't, particularly when we get to higher ed, there aren't institutions or training resources available locally. So we need to turn to online resources. Healthcare access, increasingly, particularly in rural places that have lost their hospital or clinic, we need to make resources such as telehealth, whether it's for mental health or physical health. We need to make those more available and usable, including technical assistance to help people utilize that. And then lastly, housing. We know that a number of people in the state don't have adequate housing. Many people are unhoused, or they live in a public housing facility. We want to make sure that access to digital resources is available, particularly to those underhoused populations in the state. So this is kind of a snapshot overview of what we're trying to accomplish with the Digital Equity Plan. What I can do right now is kind of walk you through the process. We spent the last 4 months conducting a series of focus groups. We had about 30 focus groups across the state with the different covered populations that we're focusing on, and I'll get to that in a second, really to understand what the particular needs and gaps are among those populations. Those populations include people over 65, English learners, incarcerated population. We want to make sure that people who are currently in the state correction system, once they leave that correction system, that they have skills and are able to become gainfully employed in the community. Low-income households, rural populations, and veterans, and people with disabilities. So those are essentially the covered populations that we're primarily targeting. However, I would say that every resident of New Hampshire is ultimately going to be a beneficiary of this, and we want to make sure that everyone has equal access or access to digital resources and technologies. So in addition to the focus groups that we've conducted a number of key informant interviews with members of each of these 8 covered populations. We have engaged with workforce development organizations, hospitals, mental health institutions, veterans organizations, civic engagement organizations, also to understand what their needs are. And many of these organizations also provide resources that enable people to either access broadband devices, or sometimes provide that technical resource or navigation to help people navigate those resources. One thing that we are looking at in this digital equity plan, we have not yet released our first draft yet, but we hope that will be in the next month. We believe that there should be some level of input and insight from regions, so that we have ears to the ground to really understand what the nuanced needs are across each of the regions in the state. So we're looking into the possibility of creating regional digital equity coalitions. And so their role will be to work with partner organizations to understand their needs, to identify populations or groups within their communities or the region that are underserved and have particular needs, so that they can voice them and share them and help craft projects and proposals that can address those needs. We launched a survey about a month ago. It's still active. We've gotten about 4,000 responses so far. So we've had some pretty robust data across the state that's pretty demographically representative to really understand what some of those nuanced needs are. I'll share something in a second, but we're doing an asset inventory to understand what organizations and institutions are out there that provide some level of support or resource around whether they're providing loan or free laptops or devices, or whether they're providing a subsidy program for broadband access, or whether they're providing some sort of technical navigation around using telehealth, for instance. We want to understand who is out there that is really serving the goals that we have in this digital equity plan. We have a statewide asset advisory council, which is comprised of members of organizations who work with these covered populations to really leverage their assets and make them partners in this planning process, so that we can support their work and then help identify areas that they could improve the digital equity plan outcomes for us. And then we had a summit on digital equity a week ago, or I think it was on Monday of this week. And then once we release the plan, much like the BEAD plan, we're going to have 30 days of public comment, and we really want to hear people's input on that plan. And we will we'll send a number of media blasts out to notify people when the plan is released, so that there's opportunity to provide feedback for that. Again, I mentioned the asset inventory. We're really trying to understand who those organizations and programs out there are that offer digital training and resources and other services to covered populations. And we actually have a live inventory. So we have, this is just a snapshot of what the portal looks like. But if you go to this link on the bottom, the bit.ly site here, you can actually, if you have a resource that supports people, whether it's in your region or statewide or at your community level, we want to know about it so we can have that included on our asset inventory. Think of it as sort of a 211 type directory of resources. So if you need help with, say, an assistive device or technology as a person with a disability, you'll know where to go to find resources to support you. So that's in process. We've got about 100 organizations so far that have entered their information into this asset inventory. Our hope is to be able to create a map, a crowdsourced map that people can continue to enter their assets that they can contribute, but have this available publicly so people can see what resources are available across the state to support all aspects of digital equity. And then again, I mentioned the survey of the covered populations. I'll just share a couple of really quick highlights that we found throughout the survey, as well as through our focus groups and other means of reaching out to different constituents. The top barriers to broadband adoption, one was cost. So we understand that 93% of locations are considered served, but even within some of those locations, there are populations that simply can't afford broadband access, don't have necessarily the digital literacy to be able to use broadband, or don't have a device at home. So there are also other barriers around accessing broadband that are at play, and we want to be able to effectively address those. And one statistic that we came to learn is of low-income households, only 15% of low-income households, based on the survey data that we have, actually have access to high-speed internet that's 100 megabits download, 20 megabits upload. So that tells you that there are some gaps that need to be addressed. There are still places where internet service is not available. Many people don't have a computer, as I noted. And then there are programs such as the Affordable Connectivity Program. Telecoms providers like Comcast offer a subsidy program, but there's little awareness that we learned through our survey that less than half of people who are eligible for these programs actually know about these programs. So we recognize that there's a lot of work to be done to raise awareness about programs that could help support people defray the cost of connectivity in their homes. So that was a pretty significant finding for us. So once we develop a plan, we're going to have a set of goals and objectives. Those goals really are around those 5 that I shared earlier about access to broadband devices, cybersecurity, literacy, etc. But we feel that in order to make this plan successfully implemented, we need to have some sort of a backbone infrastructure. The state's broadband office it has Matt, and he has a few colleagues that can work with him. They're going to need a support infrastructure to be able to implement the plan. So part of our focus is to really think about how this infrastructure is going to need to be built to be able to support the goals of digital equity and the BEAD work as well. We believe that we have to, since New Hampshire, the state government is relatively small, we're going to have to leverage partnerships with organizations, agencies, and institutions to be able to do this work. So we want to be able to leverage existing efforts that are already working on various aspects of digital equity and make them better and support them. We want to raise awareness of programs and resources that are out there that are underutilized in particular. I think we talked about growing state and regional capacity. we need to define the process for how that funding gets distributed and how it gets utilized when implemented. We don't yet have the NOFO, the notice of funding, that defines how the funding is to be distributed. So we're operating a little bit blindly, assuming that it's probably going to be some sort of an RFP process or an application process, but we really have to clarify that in the coming months. We have to define what the decision criteria are so that we can really achieve those goals that are outlined in our plan. And sustained public outreach. And then obviously you have to monitor. We want to be transparent about where we're making success. So as we evaluate the programs and projects, we want to be able to provide some sort of a dashboard so that people can see the progress that we're making across the state and within the regions. So that's kind of a snapshot of this process. In terms of funding, we can't say yet how much New Hampshire is going to receive. The federal allocation across the country is 1.4 billion for digital equity, equity, and that's by formula per state. So just a ballpark figure, we think it could be up to $20 million, but we don't know yet. And there's potential, and JD could probably speak to this. If there are funds that are unutilized for infrastructure work on the BEAD side, there could be additional funding after the broadband priorities are met, but it's up to the state to really determine how that funding gets utilized. And again, as I mentioned, the notice of funding will define the funding process when the implementation phase starts. We're looking at the implementation beginning next year, and it's going to last through, I believe, 2029. So it's a 4 or 5 year process, implementation phase, in which funding will be available to support the goals and objectives. What else? I encourage you folks to take the survey and the asset inventory if you are aware of assets and resources that can help support this digital equity work. But I just encourage people to reach out to myself and my colleague, Bob McLaughlin. I should have mentioned that the partners on the digital equity plan are the National Cooperative for Digital Equity, is an institution that's based in New Hampshire, but it's doing some excellent work nationally. And they're just a huge intellectual force behind this planning process. The Digital Equity Research Center, which has done a ton of really good research, and they've helped us with the survey design and the data analysis. And then my colleagues at Cooperative Extension. So we hope that you'll reach out to us, and really look forward to hearing from you folks. So open up to questions if folks have any. And I'm going to stop the share. So.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie, for keeping that condensed. It's so appreciative, in the busy week you've had, that you could take the time to share that with everyone here. So thanks once again. Any questions for Charlie about the digital equity plan? I have one, I think maybe a quick one, Charlie. Well, first of all, I'm pleased to hear there's still some opportunity to participate in the project, although I think time is short, and make sure to get that deadline out to the members early next week. My question was about the funding. I know in the NTIA's funding program, there's kind of the formula kind of funding to states, but also a competitive round. And our strategies that will be identified in this plan eligible for the competitive round of funding as well as the formula funding? Do we know that yet?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we know that. My assumption is that what is outlined in this plan will be not only eligible for funding within this allocation, this federal allocation, but also for competitive funding. But I don't think we'll know that until the NOFO is released. So, and JD, I don't know if you have any insights on that on your side, on the BEAD side. So
No, I don't. You're right. It's a wait and see.
Yep. And so I would say that there's a host of resources, including the BEAD resource, many of the BEAD resources on, if you go to the website, nhdigitalequity.org. You'll find various ways to get engaged in particularly the digital equity planning process, the survey, the asset inventory, but we have some BEAD information up there as well. So.
Super.
And the November 13th summit, we had a good summit, but alas, that's past us. So.
You've had a busy week.
And Charlie, you might have mentioned this, and I might have missed it though. Once your plan has gone through the rigors, it will also be out for public comment.
Yes, correct. We don't have an exact timeline. I think we expect that sometime in December or by January 1, the plan will be released for public comment. So we think in the next month, and then there'll be 30 days of public comment. And then after that, we'll have to address those comments. We'll want to make sure that we're transparent about those comments. So we'll have a resource, a place where we're going to share input or feedback on how we address the public comments. So.
Another good reason, another fodder for another meeting for you. In January.
Right.
Great. Well, once again, Charlie, thank you. And when you have a moment, please share your deck with me so I can add that to our website and the other materials for this event. I know folks are going to want to look at that and click on the links, and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we can kind of wrap up the agenda. We always have time for member updates, and we've heard quite a bit already. But are there any kind of general updates about broadband work folks would like to share as we wrap up? Doesn't have to be related to NTIA or BEAD. I have one brief update from someone who couldn't attend. Molly Miller, who's Hancock's telecom committee. I'll paraphrase, but wants to update the group that after about 3 years of work, they are getting built out with fiber optic cable. They're one of 34 towns that received federal infrastructure funds through the state's capital projects program, and partnering with Consolidated Communications. As in many of you, she also mentions that they've had multiple attempts at this, right? They've applied directly to the NTIA, to other discretionary programs, and the first round of the capital projects work. So they're really happy to have found some success with that project. That's an update from Molly Miller. Any other updates before we close things out today? Okay. Well,
hey Henry, I had sent you an email but I already mentioned it earlier that Francistown applied for this round of BMGI, so we're just waiting to see whether we get awarded or not.
And Alfie, have you been given like a ETA or window with when you might hear?
Well, I don't know. There was a general date of December-ish, I think, sometime in December, but I don't know if that's a fixed date or what. So hopefully we'll find out then.
And I do have your note in front of me. The town ended up partnering with Consolidated Communications for this proposal. But it sounds like you've also had interest from other providers, Comcast and 066.
Correct.
Mutually expressed interest.
That's true.
Okay, well, I'll be following up today's presentations on Monday with an email blast to kind of consolidate things. Folks will have access to the materials, remind us about the deadlines for particularly the BEAD proposal documents and how to do that. That's all I can think of for now. We always welcome feedback on our meetings. I'll send this out as well. If you do have a smartphone, you can also start a quick questionnaire. That way, there's just 3 questions on this form, and it lets us know how our Monadnock Broadband agendas are being received. Okay, so with that, I think we'll end today's Monadnock Broadband Group meeting. I want to thank Charlie and John for taking a chunk out of their week at short notice, and what I know is a very busy week for them. And thank you to folks who joined today and for those tuning in to this YouTube.
Yes, thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.